Just a quick introduction. This video is quite long, so if you don't have time, the document that I'm using is in the description. You don't need to sign up for anything, no emails, just click the link. I was also quite ill when I recorded this video a long time ago, so sorry about that, and hope you enjoy. So today's session is all about finding vocabulary, understanding vocabulary, learning vocabulary, remembering vocabulary. Did I say learning twice? No, maybe not. Remembering vocabulary and also using vocabulary with a focus on turning passive vocabulary into active vocabulary, which is something that a lot of students at an intermediate and an advanced level struggle to do. They understand words when they read them or when they hear them. However, when they come to use them, especially when they're speaking, their brain just can't find that word, and they end up using all the words that they are very comfortable with, and that means that they can't experiment or kind of get better with their speaking skills because they're not using the new vocabulary. And what's the point in learning all this new vocabulary if you're not going to be able to use it? So that's why the focus today is on turning passive vocabulary into active vocabulary. So just to clear that up, passive vocabulary, words you understand. Active, if it's something is in your active vocabulary, it means that you can produce them when you need to. So, for example, I could use the word encounter without reading it. I would just be able to say that word. There are lots of, it's very normal for people's passive vocabulary to be much bigger than their active vocabulary. And that's the case for me in English. It'll be the same for you in your native language. You will understand loads of words in your native language. However, you probably do rely on a certain set of words when you're speaking. This is completely normal. However, usually when we're learning a language, that gap is often a little bit too big, or the differences are a little bit too big, and it's very useful for turning those passive words into your active vocabulary, especially because you don't actually need to do the hard work of learning them and remembering the definition and how to use it. You already know what that word means. It's just a kind of a matter of switching that word into a word that you are able to produce when you're speaking. So that's the focus of today's session. So the first section is encountering new words. Now, there are a few ways to do this, and the best way, in my opinion, is to find them authentically through materials. So when you're listening, or when you're reading, or when you're watching, you will find and encounter new words that you don't know. Now, different people will have different ways of doing this, and it depends on what type of English session you're having. So if you watched the Q&A last week where we were talking about productivity and English and kind of having passive learning and also active learning. So with passive learning, you might be cooking, you might be cleaning, you might be walking your dog, and you're listening to a podcast. If you're doing that and you hear a new word, you don't want to stop walking your dog and go on Google and have a look for what that word means. That would be quite annoying, and it's not really productive in a passive session. So when you are doing those passive sessions or even watching TV, or you kind of you do want to do a little bit of English today, but you don't have that much energy or effort, you don't need to look up every single word, especially if you can kind of guess it through context. Guessing it through context is not the best thing usually, because sometimes you can get it wrong unless you understand all of the sentence before, all of the sentence apart from that word, all of the sentence that comes afterwards, and you understand through visual cues what's happening. Then you might be able to have a good guess, but sometimes your guess will be wrong, and then you might actually attach a wrong definition or meaning to that word, and then you have double the work because you have to unlearn that first meaning and then learn the new one, and that could get in the way. But when you are doing that passive learning session, you don't exactly need to look up every word. That's what I'm trying to say. However, there should be active learning sessions in your English schedule. And that means reading as well. It's not just kind of grammar work and vocabulary work. It is really focused reading and listening. And when you are doing that,
you can look up the words. Look, you don't need to do it in that exact moment unless you really want to and you're really stuck and you're like, actually, I don't understand this video or this podcast without understanding this context. You can either pause or stop reading and then look it up there and then, or you can wait until the end of a sentence. Well, not the end of a paragraph, maybe, or until you finish the chapter or a section. With a podcast, you don't want to kind of watch the whole podcast because they can be like an hour long and you'll have like 50 words maybe or 20 words. Then you have lots of things to do and you'd have to go back and find them in context, which might not be so easy. So it's probably best to do it in sections. So maybe wait until the end of a section before they move on to a next topic, or the end of a chapter or a paragraph, for example, if you're reading. And then you can look up new words. Then you can have a look back and see what it means in that context. So that's how I recommend encountering and finding new words, is going through and if encountering them and finding them through your reading and your listening and building up your vocabulary that way. Because I like it this way because it's like you're doing two things at the same time. You're reading, you're listening, and you're also doing vocabulary work at the same time. Needs to be in your active focus sessions though. And also you learn them in context. So one way that some people like to learn vocabulary is using a list, but that's decontextualized. It's not within a context. You are kind of just learning a word by itself, and it's not kind of in a sentence. It's not in a situation. It's not in a story. And I think if it is contextualized, then it's much easier to remember. I like to do like fiction in one of the resources that I probably sent you if you entered the 500 giveaway competition, or you're a member of the new community, is that there's like 8 short stories for intermediate learners. And I do that. I read that with my students quite a lot. And when they come across a word that they don't know, they can easily attach that word to that story because they're like, oh yes, that word came from this story, and they're able to remember it better that way because it is contextualized. If it's just from a list, then not the easiest way to remember, and you're relying on like pure memory power. And if you're remembering it attached to a story, then it just helps you out a little bit more. But you don't have to do it this way. That's just the way that I recommend, but different people like different things. So you can kind of do it in a different way. So you can do it through category by category. So I love the Oxford Learners Dictionary. I love it for the definitions, which I'll show you in a second. But also, if you go to the top and press word list, you can save words. Actually, you can like log in, you can sign up and log in, and you can save all your words in here, which I've never actually done, but I know that's an option. But you can press topics, and you can press animals, for example. You can look at different vocabulary. You can find different vocabulary related to different animals. So, for example, let's look at something a little bit more difficult rather than just names of animals. For example, animal behavior. And you will, okay, these are just maybe sounds that animals won't make. Like bar is the name, that's how a sheep makes a noise in English. I actually didn't know this, but in different languages, they have different words for the animals that the noises that animals make. I thought is all the same because a frog sounds the same to an English person than it does to a Polish person or a Filipino person, but apparently they have different sounds that different animals makes. Bit off tangent, but I found that really interesting. Let's continue with the animal behavior. So you'll find all these words which are about animal behavior, a long list. As you can see, what is pretty interesting, I'm actually going to choose something else because we don't want that. Let's do groups of animals. Okay, yeah. 1 second. Don't know what's happened here. Okay, and as you can see, there's a place to press pronunciation and it will say it out loud, so you can check the pronunciation. This is really easy. Additionally, you can see that they have a grade next to them: C1, 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 C2, A2, C2. So what I'd recommend is thinking about what level you are. So for example, if you are a B1 level, I would remove the C2 and probably the C1 level words, and try to, obviously you want the A1s, you want the A2s, you want the B1s, because this is what level you are. So you should have a vocabulary for most things, especially if the things that you talk about a lot. For example, if you're interested in animals or you talk about animals, maybe choosing a category related to something that you're interested in, or maybe your job, then you kind of want maybe to know all of them potentially, but you definitely want to know at least the ones that you're a level, what level you're at. And then I'd also choose the level higher as well. So if you're a B1, click B2 as well. If you're a B2, I would press C1 as well, because you want to push yourself. See, that's how you get to the next level, is learning more difficult vocabulary. So if you're B1, press B2 as well, press done, and you'll see a shorter list: family, pack, species. There you go. Don't, if you're a B1 level, don't bother learning C2 level words, because you're not at that level yet, and you can do if you want to, if you think they're going to be really useful. But I like to keep things simple, kind of just go, don't push yourself too hard, because those C2 level words are C2 level for a reason, because they're difficult to use and understand. Often they come with nuance and specific ways in which you can use them, which might be a little bit difficult for you to understand. So I would keep it to your level and below, and also one level higher. So that's one way you can do it. You can learn it through categories, especially if it's, like I said, something you're really interested in. So for example, if you love talking about health, then you will find loads of different categories related to health, and you'll find loads of different words, which is really useful. Some people love learning vocabulary like this. It depends on what type of person you are. Additionally, you will have got a list of the 5,000 most important words, and this is categorized from A1 to B2 and also B2 to C1. So for example, if you are B1 or B2, you might want to click on this one and have a look at all these words. It is in alphabetical order. There are sections again, however, they are sectioned by level. So A1, A2, and they will continue. So some people prefer to do it very systematically and just go through this list and find words that they don't know. I have sent this to students before. For example, someone who is a B1 level, and I have asked them to go through this big list and basically just write an A next to it. If it's in your active vocabulary, you should be able to produce this word very easily when you're speaking, or a P. If it's in your passive vocabulary, you would understand it if you read it or you hear it, but you probably would never really say this word. Or like, I don't know, an X if you don't understand this word. What you could do, especially for words that are lower than your level or your level, is make sure that you at least add all of those X's into your passive vocabulary. And then with those words that you identify as your passive vocabulary, you can do exercises, which I'll show you shortly, how to turn them into your active vocabulary. So I don't think these lists are the best way to learn new vocabulary, because it feels quite it's just very decontextualized. It's just literally just a list of words. However, it can be really good for checking which words you think are in your active or passive vocabulary, or you don't know, especially words you kind of don't know. Like maybe you never knew the word colleague, and you're like, oh, actually, that's a really important word. You can look it up. Maybe you've heard it before. Oh, I've heard that word before. I've heard the word colleague before, but you don't know what it means. Then this can be a good way to find those small gaps in your vocabulary that you want to fill in or to improve. So yeah, the lists can be useful, but I wouldn't use it as your main resource. Going back, so pay attention to the context to understand how the words are being used. Yes, that's why I like learning and encountering words in authentic materials. Try to classify the words you want to learn according to your understanding of them. It could go from semi-understandable to completely unknown. Yes, so that is what I was talking about related to the lists. Now, when you find a new word, you have to try and understand it. Like, it's not just about finding new words, you have to try and understand it, what it means. Now, there are a few ways to do this. Definitions alone aren't enough. You must grasp how the word is used in context. Use dictionaries and visual aids to understand definitions. Be aware of the 3 dimensions of a word: the meaning or the definition, the form, the spelling, the pronunciation, and part of the speech. use, context in which it can be applied. So yeah, context is a very important one. The thing about vocabulary is that the more that you hear a word, so for example, let's go back to the word colleague. If you just learned colleague and you heard it for the first time, you looked it up and you're like, okay, that is what colleague means. Now, every time that you hear that word colleague, your brain will understand that word better and better each time, because you'll hear it being used in different contexts and different people using it in different ways. So the more that you hear that word or read that word, the better of a kind of a whole understanding of that word and how you can use it. This is kind of why slang is very difficult to use for people, not even English learners, for example. In English, we have lots of slang. Like even in British English, we have lots of slang. And if you don't get the context right, it can sound very strange and off-putting. And this is why when Americans use British slang, or British people use American slang, because they haven't heard it that many times in different contexts, they might not use it like perfectly right, and when they do that, it sounds really strange and weird. So that's why slang is really difficult to use, because they haven't heard it in enough contexts, I think. So some people like to use a translation. I think this is a good way to understand the basic words. So for example, I've used the word dry, translate it into your language, Spanish, Lithuanian, whatever. This is a good way to understand it. If you don't want to just use the word, you can write in a context. The cake was dry. This is probably a better way to understand it, by writing a sentence, because the word dry can have multiple meanings. Maybe they don't give you the exact one that you were looking for, related to how you found the word. So if you're reading an article or an essay and you found this sentence, the cake was dry, maybe you wrote in dry because you didn't know the word dry, but it's given you dry in a different meaning, like talking about the weather. And you're like, how can a cake be related to the weather? But you're actually just talking about how wet something is. So that's why it's sometimes better to translate in a whole sentence. You can also have a look at some images as well. I think this is pretty useful. So for example, if you type in dry on Google Images, then as you can see, you have a pretty good idea of what the word dry means. You see lots of kind of landscapes which are dry. You might start seeing some other context, like some dry skin. Don't want to focus too much on that. But yeah, images can also be a good way to understand the word. I wouldn't rely on them much. For the pronunciation, you can use Youglish. This is a tool that I recommend using a lot. You can type in a word, you can choose an accent if you want to, but it will find videos on YouTube of people saying that word. Now, this is great because you don't just hear the pronunciation of different people pronouncing the word, but you also hear it used in different contexts as well. So you can listen to it here, you can press next, after listening to it, next, and you'll find loads of different contexts of people using the word dry. And here you will find the transcript. So fortunately, we had a dry run. So a dry run, that's very different than kind of moisture or the weather. So there you go. You have a new context of the word dry in this video, and you can continue watching it if you want to. I love the Oxford Learners Dictionary because it's for language learners, and it gives very easy to understand definitions. And I also like the example sentences they give. So if we have a look at the word dry here, you will find loads of definitions. The main one is not wet, which is true. So let me zoom in a little bit. The first definition would be not wet or sticky, without water or moisture. Is my shirt dry yet? Store onions in a cool, dry place. I'm afraid this cake has turned out very dry. As you can see, loads of different sentences. We have other examples. You can also you can find it in a different topic. Okay, so when we're talking about the topics before, this is in the cooking and eating section. Then you can find more definitions as well. Little rain with very little rain, weeks of hot, dry weather, the dry season. I hope it stays dry for our picnic. Then we have loads more. Dry related to skin and hair, a dry cough, dry bread. Okay, yeah, eaten on its own without any butter or jam. Breakfast consisted of dry bread and a cup of tea. Yes, so not great. You can have dry wine, not sweet. You can have a dry sense of humor, dry without emotion. If something is boring, you can call it dry. If someone is not drinking alcohol, they are dry. We had a dry wedding, a dry county, a dry state. People don't drink much there. So as you can see, thirsty. And we also have some idioms as well here. So that's why I love the Oxford Learner's Dictionary, because because it gives you loads of different understandings, definitions, and meanings, which are really useful. You don't obviously need to learn all of them because that's a lot to remember. Maybe just learn the ones which you think are the most interesting. Usually the ones at the top, 1, 2, and 3 are probably the most common ones. For example, with the alcohol one, how often do you really hear this? Not that often. This is actually quite American, to be honest. People would say sober, like we stayed sober for the wedding, or people don't drink much in this county or state. So yeah, the ones at the top are usually the most common ones. So this is what you should be doing when you encounter a new word. You're trying to understand it as much as possible. Let me go back quickly here. Yes, the final thing you should be doing is checking if the word is actually useful or not. So I have found a prompt, which is the word, then the word dry, commonly used and worth learning for general conversation? If so, can you provide 3 example sentences showing its most common use with a brief explanation? Now, ChatGPT will tell you if the word is commonly used or not, and if it is commonly used, then it's probably worth learning. So yes, the word dry is very commonly used and absolutely worth learning. Okay, that's pretty positive. I think you should probably learn the word dry. It has a few different meanings, but the most common one refers to the lack of water or moisture used for weather, skin, clothes, food, etc. And you can see some sentences. Then it does ask you if you want to hear some more definitions or meaning kind of in different contexts. So for example, a dry sense of humor. You can obviously find out more information from ChatGPT if you want to, but I like to use the Oxford Learner's Dictionary, as I said before. To give you an example of a word which is not commonly used, so there is a word arid, which basically just means dry as well, but it's just more specific and it's more related to the weather and it's more kind of academic or science. So I asked it the same prompt, is the word arid commonly used? The word arid, did I spell it? No, I did, yeah. Not common. It is not commonly used in everyday conversation. It's more formal and usually found in academic, scientific, or descriptive writing, especially when talking about climate or land. So if you're reading a book, and most of the time you will find words that aren't worth learning in books, especially old books, because people, when they're writing, they like to use fancy vocabulary for some reason and use words that people never actually say in English. So if the main way that you're inputting your English language is through listening, especially like podcasts or TV, you will find words that people actually use. That's why it's good to watch like maybe even reality TV or any type of TV or listen to podcasts, because it's real people saying real things. When you're reading a book, you come across adjectives, mostly adjectives, to be honest, and lots of different nouns of words that aren't actually worth using or learning, because your brain is limited, your memory is limited. You don't want to waste it with the word arid, because when was the last time I said arid? I can't remember. Probably a very long time ago. So it's not worth learning. And this is why this ChatGPT prompt is so useful, because you can find out if this word is worth learning or not. I have a student who reads a lot. His English is excellent. He basically, we just have classes to improve his vocabulary, and he just uses me instead of this ChatGPT prompt. He is fully aware, by the way, that he can use ChatGPT, but he knows that if he doesn't book a class with a tutor, then he won't turn up. He won't do this work. So I'm basically his accountability partner. But we come across so many words in books that he's reading that just aren't useful. And honestly, a lot of the time I just say, I don't know that word. I've never heard this word. I have no idea what it means. Or I just say, that's not worth learning, because no one actually ever says that word. You'll never need it. And here is an example, arid. So use this ChatGPT prompt. It is very useful. But let's move on to storing vocabulary. Well, yeah, just before, when you kind of are writing things down, actually, let's talk about that in the storing. So the next section is when you understand a word and then you realize it is worth learning, like the word dry, then you have to kind of store it somewhere. Now, different people have different systems for this. Some people love flashcard systems and used spaced repetition learning. You can use Anki for this, or you can use Quizlet. I do have a Quizlet premium account, so maybe I can create some flashcard systems for you guys, but I don't know how that would work, but I'll try. But I will leave a video in this post explaining how to use Anki or how to use Quizlet to do spaced repetition learning with your new vocabulary. You can add pictures, you can add definitions, you can add it in context. But some people love doing this. And I think it is quite an effective way just to kind of keep your brain reminded of those new words that you're learning so they don't slip out of your memory. So some people love this and they use them religiously, like every single day. They'll do their Anki rounds, and it is, it's popular for a reason. I think it does work, but it depends on the person. But that won't be enough for it to be in your passive vocabulary, active vocabulary. You'll need to do more exercises. But flashcards is a very good way to store vocabulary and to practice with them. Some people like to have a notebook, so they might have a notebook like this, and they might have all their vocabulary written down in there. Literally do what works for you. Some people prefer sticky notes. They have a sticky note and they put them around their house, especially if there are certain words that they're focusing on. For example, if for example, this week in the workbook topic is the Industrial Revolution. Now, if you know that you're going to be talking about the Industrial Revolution this week and next week, then why not write them on sticky notes, put them around the place where you speak English and learn English, so you're always constantly reminded. You see them a lot. The more that you see it, and especially if it's like in front of you on a wall or on your desk, then you're going to see that word loads, and your brain is going to be able to remember that words a lot easier. So sticky notes is a pretty good way to remember vocabulary because you just see it so many times. You see it probably like 50 times a day. If it's in your office and you're there working all day, you're just going to like look at it occasionally loads, and that you're going to reinforce that quite well. Another way to do this is by using mind maps. So going back to the Oxford Learner's Dictionary topics, they don't have a mind map, but you could kind of create your own mind map. So here is an example of food: meat, fruit, grain, milk, produce or dairy, and vegetables. And you can create a mind map. You can draw some pretty pictures. Look, different people learn through different ways. Mind maps, if you're a visual person, this will be an excellent way. Then other people like doing different things. You can also create a Google Sheets and like an Excel file, and then in each tab at the bottom you can have nouns, adjectives, verbs, adverbs, phrasal verbs, and kind of have it like that. You have to experiment, find out what works for you, because each different things will work for different people. So experiment, see what's best for you when it comes to storing your vocabulary. But I will leave a video of how to use Anki. If you don't use flashcards already, then this could be something which is quite interesting and new. So you've found a word, you understand the word, you've worked out that it's worth learning, you've stored the word somewhere. Now, what do you do? Well, repetition is the key to retention. So remembering, try not to force it, but to reach for consistency. Visual association practice. Find an image online that represents the word. You can write the word and its meaning below the image. So if you are storing the word digitally, then why not attach an image to it on your flashcard, attach an image to it. Remember those images of dry landscapes. If you associate that dry image with the word dry, you'll be able to remember it a lot easier. And you can do that digitally quite easily. Record yourself, say the word and its definition aloud. While recording yourself, use it in a few sentences and focus on the pronunciation. So if you just recently started learning a group of words, so imagine you choose a topic and it's food like this, and you're like, okay, I don't know any of these words: chicken, beef, lamb, apple, orange, barley, corn, oats. Then why not record it? The best thing to do is like to expose yourself to that word a lot, as many times as possible, kind of like related to that sticky notes idea. Well, you can record yourself with your phone, just saying these words out loud. It's perfect if it's in context and personal to you. So, for example, if you really like chicken, or you have some chickens in your garden, then you could say, "I have 3 chickens in my garden, and they're called Tim, Tom, and Tommy." They have the same names almost, but I wasn't very creative. But yeah, if you say something like that, then you will be able to remember it easier, and you can listen to it while you're doing other things. So one of your passive learning sessions can be you listening to your new vocabulary, and you can listen to that whenever you want, a few times a day. And the more that you listen to it, like the more times you see it, the more that your brain will remember it. But this is best done in context. So say the whole sentence. When you're kind of doing those active vocabulary sessions, when you are sitting down at your desk, at your table, and saying, okay, I'm going to do 15 minutes of vocabulary words, you can ask yourself questions about the vocabulary. So, for example, if you're learning the word umbrella, the way to kind of remember it and reinforce it. Okay, what is an umbrella? Well, it's a tool for staying dry. Where do you see it? Where do you see it, or where do you use it? Outside in the streets. Why is it important? It protects you from the weather and stops you from getting wet. Who uses it? Anyone who goes outside, and lots of British people. When do you use it? During rain or sunshine. Okay, yeah, I suppose people used to use it in sunshine, but not so much anymore. But yeah, you get on saying, ask some questions about it, then you have a better understanding of it. You can actually record yourself doing this as well. So that is a good way to reinforce it. Obviously, if you're a high level, then these examples might be quite obvious, like umbrella or dry. But imagine you never learned the word umbrella before, it's the first time seeing it, then it's not so easy. So yeah, that's why these questions and also recording yourself in context can be useful. So that is how you reinforce the understanding of the word. You need to do specific exercises for reinforcing. So that's the flashcards. It's listening to yourself. It's kind of seeing them visually, and also kind of doing work with understanding it. And so you memorize it. Now, once you've memorized it, you want to add it to your active vocabulary. Now, the main way to do the main problem that people have is that they might be reading a word, and let's go back to the start. They are reading an article, they see the word umbrella, they don't know what it means, they look it up, they look at the pictures, okay, and this is obvious, I know what an umbrella is. Now they think, okay, umbrella, pretty useful word. They might not even need to ask ChatGPT that, because they think, come on, this isn't obvious, I should know that word. They learn it, they store it, and they might do some exercises with it, like ask some questions, and they're writing the answer. They might not be speaking it out loud. Now, when they're actually in a conversation, imagine they're at work, and they got into work. It was raining that day, and it was wet, and they're trying to speak to their colleague in English, and they're like, yeah, I wish I brought my, and they just learned that word. They learned the word umbrella, but they can't find it when they're speaking, even though they've done loads of exercises on it recently. Well, if you haven't actually said the word out loud, then why would your brain be able to think that word when you're speaking, especially when you need it, especially when you're like in a more stressful situation? Lots of people don't feel confident when they're speaking English, so they feel a little bit like panicked maybe, or they're like rushing, or they just don't feel comfortable. And when we're in this state, it's more difficult for our brain to operate sometimes, and it's more difficult to find those words that you really need. So that's why it's really important to actually say the word out loud. Now, you can just do it really obviously and blatantly and just say umbrella, 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 And the more times you say it, the more likely your brain is to remember it, because you've actually made the sound with your mouth. It's not the first time that you're doing it when you need it. You can do it like that, but the kind of, to go back to what I've said, you can record yourself kind of saying it in context, but don't be afraid to sound like someone who's crazy, but by just repeating words out loud in your room by yourself. There's nothing wrong by saying dry umbrella, dry umbrella, dry umbrella, like this. But you need to practice actually saying the word out loud. So that is one way to add passive vocabulary into your active vocabulary. Another way is another exercise is use the word in meaningful contexts. Write a text including the words you want to activate to the best of your abilities. Push your boundaries by making it as complex as possible. This is kind of similar to this one as well. Link words in a chain by creating a story where each new word naturally connects to the next. For example, imagine you are learning the words bright, bloom, delicious, and relaxed. Now try to create some sentences or some stories where you're using all of the words. The bright sun made the flowers bloom, and the garden smelled delicious. I felt relaxed sitting under the tree. So you've used the four words that you're learning, all connected. And the more that you do this, the more that you actually use them in speech, speaking out loud, and also writing them, the more they get activated, the more comfortable you'll feel when using them. So it's just about practice. You just need to practice actually using this word in a safe space, like when you're by yourself, at your table, at your desk, when you're doing your active learning sessions. You need to create your own sentences, you need to say them out loud. And it's better if you kind of use them in a way which is connected to you. So if you get dry hands, you could create a sentence saying, I get dry hands, because it's personal to you. If you have a red umbrella and it has a picture of a cat on it, then you could say, I have a red umbrella and it has a cat on it, for example. If you can kind of connect them to you, make them more personal, then the more likely you are to remember them. But the key to adding passive vocabulary into active vocabulary is just activating them on purpose, purposefully. And you can do that at home by writing sentences, speaking out loud. But you need to do that because you won't be able to find the words when you really need them if you've never actually created your own sentences with them beforehand. Another thing that I like to do, this is not really connected to turning passive vocabulary into active vocabulary, but you can choose a handful of words you want to activate and keep them in your mind when you speak. So going back to this list of 5,000 words, imagine you're going down this B2 list and you find 10 words in here which are not in your active vocabulary. Now, you could just do 10 words at a time, 20 words at a time, and just each week you have a list of 20 words that you are either learning or that you want to activate, that you want to put into your active vocabulary. Just have these lists in front of you, like when you're doing your English speaking, when you join a group call, when you're doing your speaking sessions, or when you're just kind of just have that list of 10 to 20 words, either that you're learning or turning passive to active, in front of you with you at all times. So you can just do this really easily. Like, obviously this is not as fun as going on your phone, but instead of going on your phone, maybe you could have a notes page on your phone with your words, and you can just look at them and just create some sentences in your head on the bus, something like that. I don't know. But have these words in front of you. Like, you can do it different ways. So you can do it like choosing 10 words per week and learning them or activating them. Or if you read an article, so for example, let's just pull up a BBC article, Guardian article, sorry. UK inflation falls to 2.6%, increasing pressure on bank to cut interest rates. Now imagine you're reading this article and you find 10 new words. Now those 10 new words could be the 10 new words that you focus on that week. So what I'm trying to say is group words together and learn them in together at one time. And that's when you can do the categorization, or you can create the stories with them, but kind of just focus on a certain group of words in a period of time. Because, you know, if you look at this list and you go from A1 to B2, and you're like, well, actually, there are 2,000 words that I don't know, or 2,000 words that are in my passive vocabulary and not in my active vocabulary. That seems like a mountain of work to do, and it is a mountain of work to do. However, if you just, you know, make it into smaller chunks over time, that mountain will become a molehill, to use a English phrase of you're making a mountain out of a molehill. I will just quickly show that. A molehill is one of these hills that moles makes. So this animal is called a mole, and they make little hills. So someone is saying, you have seen a molehill and you are deciding it is a mountain. But I'm going off topic. Let's continue. But that's about it. These are some exercises. I will link this document in the call if you want to review it. Extra useful tips for learning vocabulary. Input is useful. Yeah, it's not all about doing exercises. Listening and reading to as much as possible will give you a good understanding of vocabulary. However, it will mostly just increase your passive vocabulary, which is not a bad thing at all. It's not a bad thing to have a big passive vocabulary at all. Like, that's good because you'll understand reading and listening materials better. It is just important to add passive vocabulary into your active vocabulary. And finally, set vocabulary goals. Like I was just mentioning, don't try and learn all 3,000 in a week, because you won't. Well, I don't know, maybe you will, but I doubt it. So set yourself vocabulary goals: 5 new words a week, 10 new words a week, or like 10 words in my passive vocabulary that I want to add to my vocabulary, to my active vocabulary. But set a reasonable number. Don't be too ambitious. Don't say 50, don't say 100, because this is too many. Maybe set yourself a goal of 5 to begin with. If you do that comfortably, if you do it the first week, why not try 6 the next week? If 6 was okay, why not try 7 the week after? But vocabulary goals is quite interesting. And finally, vocabulary is really important. People who are at an intermediate or upper intermediate level, vocabulary is one of just the ways that you improve. Because when you're listening to someone and they say a word and you don't understand it, that stops you from understanding. Now, to understand them, you need to know the vocabulary. So that's why knowing vocabulary, improving your passive vocabulary, growing your passive vocabulary is important for generally leveling up and having better communication, because you understand what that person is saying. Additionally, when you are speaking, having a bigger active vocabulary is important because you can be more precise with what you're saying. So, for example, to use the word dry, imagine you're eating a cake and you're like, this cake, you don't know how to, you're eating it and you're saying, it's not nice, it's not a nice cake. Well, you don't want to say that. You want to be specific. You want to say the cake is nice, it's sweet, it tastes of I don't know what a cake does, but it's dry. If you don't know how to use the word dry, if you don't know the word dry, if it's not in your active vocabulary, you won't be able to say it. So that's why you need those higher B2 level words, those C1 level words if you're a B2 level, because then you can be more precise with what you mean. Because I'm sure everyone has been in a situation where they want to say something in English and they know exactly what to say in their native language to be as precise, as accurate as possible. And they could be as accurate as possible in the native language. But however, when they're using English, their vocabulary is limited and they can't be as precise as possible. And they end up saying something that they don't actually mean. And we don't want that. We want to be more precise and accurate with our speech. But I think that is everything. I will leave a summary of the different exercises that you can do, but that is essentially it. So I'm going to